Hello everyone, welcome back to Mortem Files. Today we're diving deep into another chilling case study, so stay with me as we uncover the truth. But now, let's turn to today's case. In Tokyo, Japan, between 1988 and 1989, there was an atmosphere so tense that it kept everyone, especially parents of young girls, on high alert. At that time, the police were giving the same advice: never take your eyes off your daughters. Not even for a single second. Because at that time, a very strange man was roaming freely. You must have already read the title of this video, so there's no point in dragging this out. In this intro, we're going to talk about an infamous killer who had many victims, but we're going to explore his story in detail, step by step. So let's learn a little more about today's case revolving around Otaku Killer of Japan. Tsutomu Miyazaki was born on August 21, 1962, in Tokyo, Japan. Due to some complications, Miyazaki was born before his 9 months were complete, which basically meant he was a premature baby. But nonetheless, his family was overjoyed to have a son born into their home. Miyazaki belonged to a well-off family. His father didn't just work in the newspaper industry. He was the owner, a man of considerable influence in their neighborhood. Miyazaki's mother was a housewife, and with his father running such a big business, they were naturally happy to have a son, someone who could one day take over the family business. Since Miyazaki was their only son, one would expect him to be showered with love and care. But from his childhood, Miyazaki never really received that affection from his mother or his father, the kind of love a child truly needs. His father was always consumed with growing his business, thinking about it every hour of every day. And Miyazaki's mother never really paid attention to him either. Growing up without care or parental attention, his insecurities and lack of confidence grew significantly. But there was one more thing that made Miyazaki stand out: a physical deformity. His hands were attached in a way at the wrists that made it impossible for him to bend them upwards. Because of this deformity, no one at school paid him any attention or wanted to interact with him. He was often bullied. While the other kids played and laughed at school, Miyazaki would quietly sit in a corner of the classroom, immersing himself in a manga. Even when the other kids were laughing, joking, and having lunch together, Miyazaki would still be buried in his manga, lost in his own world. It wasn't that Miyazaki didn't want friends, or didn't want to be social, or that he didn't want to talk about his interests. Whenever people saw him, they kept their distance. In fact, most of the time, no one even greeted him at school. Miyazaki loved reading books, not just his school textbooks, but also manga like Dragon Ball Z. Manga and comic books became his comfort zone, and he had made them his entire world. Because he immersed himself so deeply in books, Miyazaki was completely alone, both at school and at home. He had no one to share his feelings with except his grandfather. Whenever Miyazaki tried to talk to his parents about his emotions, they would either scold him or simply brush him off. In a way, his parents didn't care much about their son's personal happiness. Miyazaki also had a sister, but she didn't speak to him either because of his hand deformity. At home, there was only one person who paid him any attention: his grandfather. The only person who truly cared for him. He was the only person who genuinely cared about Miyazaki's happiness and wanted to understand his pain. But everything changed for Miyazaki when his grandfather passed away in 1988. After Miyazaki's grandfather passed away, he spent his entire days watching anime and reading manga and comic books. And don't think that his bedroom shelves held only anime tapes and comic books. Every wall was completely lined with them. He had become truly obsessed. Because of that, his studies were also being affected. Until then, he had been scoring quite well, but after this upheaval, his grades began to drop. Where Miyazaki had once been among the top 10 students in his class, he now ranked 40th out of 56 students. Miyazaki had a single dream since childhood. He wanted to become a teacher. To achieve this, he took his studies very seriously, hoping that by earning good grades in his final year, he could secure admission to a prestigious college in Tokyo. For Miyazaki, this wasn't just a dream. It was a do-or-die situation. Very few things in life gave him happiness, just 3 or 4 to be exact: his grandfather, manga, and his dream of becoming a teacher. But as his obsession with manga grew, his grades began to slip. Unwilling to let this derail him entirely, he ended up changing his life plan and his dreams. And his life plan had now taken a complete 180-degree turn. He enrolled in a local junior college and began studying a course in photography technology. This was the second time Miyazaki had to part ways with something that brought him happiness, the first being when he lost his grandfather. Just like in school, Miyazaki didn't have many friends in college either. In a way, he had few friends both at school and in college. Can you imagine how difficult it must have been for him to socialize under such isolation? I mean, compared to a regular student, he didn't know how to talk to boys, and he didn't know how to talk to girls either. He wasn't particularly interested in any of the courses, photography included. But there was one thing that kept him engaged in this course, and it wasn't the subject itself. Miyazaki loved taking photographs, mainly so he could look back at them later and remember the good old days. Wherever he went, he always carried his camera with him. He might forget his wallet once in a while, but he would never forget to bring his camera along. He took photos of every corner of his college campus, but he was especially drawn to the tennis court. Most of his days were spent there, capturing images and observing the court in detail. At first, it might sound completely harmless, but Miyazaki's intentions for going there were very different and extremely disturbing. He had no real interest in tennis itself. He was there solely to take photos of the female players. So whenever the female players ran or moved on the court, he would zoom in on their skirts, taking photos solely for his own perverse pleasure. Even saying it makes me feel sick and disgusted, so I can't imagine what Miyazaki was thinking at the time. Allegedly, he had an insecurity about his own body, and since he had never interacted with a girl, he resorted to watching obscene movies to satisfy his sexual urges. By now, Miyazaki had developed an addiction to these obscene movies. As I mentioned earlier, he already had a large collection of animation videotapes, but among those tapes, there were many explicit anime videos as well. Among these explicit animated videos, some were relatively normal, but many were extremely violent. He had become so obsessed with them that there was barely any space left in his room to store all the tapes. His collection totaled an astonishing 5,763 videotapes. But his obsession with these videos was spiraling so far out of control that even his sister was no longer safe around him. He would secretly watch his sisters while they bathed, and this continued for several years, until one day, his older sister caught him red-handed. When his sister and mother confronted him, Miyazaki attacked them. His sister and mother were left both disgusted and deeply disappointed by his actions. They couldn't understand why Miyazaki's behavior had suddenly changed so drastically. After the confrontation with his mother and sister, he was no longer the same as the old Miyazaki. During the day, he worked as a printer assistant, but at night, or whenever he had free time, he spent it entirely watching these obscene videos, and the obsession kept growing stronger and stronger. He no longer watched just these videos. He had started watching ones that involved kids as well. A child exposed to violent videos filled with assault, mutilation, and other disturbing content, combined with isolation, no friends, and the crushing weight of social rejection, becomes a recipe for disaster. A disaster, one so unimaginable that even the parents and the police in Japan were not prepared for it. It was August 22nd, 1988. 4-year-old Mari Kano was on her way to a friend's house to play. The house wasn't far, so she set off walking there all by herself. Just then, a Nissan car pulled up beside her. Inside sat a man who offered Mari some chocolates and told her to get into his car. Mari was only 4 years old. You know, at that age, children don't really understand what's good or what's bad for them. She was so innocent, and perhaps this man knew exactly how to take advantage of that innocence. Excited by the promise of chocolates, little Mari got into the Nissan. The man spoke to her gently, almost sweetly, as if trying to win her trust. He then drove the car to a wooded area, parking it under a bridge. For about 30 minutes, he kept talking to Mari, giving her chocolates, making her laugh, keeping her at ease. But then, everything changed. Suddenly, with both hands, the man wrapped his fingers around Mari's small neck and began to strangle her. He kept strangling Mari until he was certain she was gone. Just moments earlier, that very seat had held a cheerful little girl, full of laughter. Now, it was occupied by a lifeless body. But even after ending her life, the man was still not satisfied. He went on to commit acts so dark. He started mistreating her. After committing the crime, he discarded Mari's body among the bushes in a nearby forest. But he kept her clothes with him, taking them back to his home as if they were some kind of trophy. Once there, he placed the clothes inside his cabinet. Then, from this huge videotape collection, he selected one cassette to watch, and he used these clothes while watching obscene videos. As you might have, this man was none other than Tsutomu Miyazaki. A few days later, Miyazaki returned to the same area where he had left Mary's body, just to check if anyone had discovered it. But when he arrived, he saw that nothing had changed. Her body was still lying there, untouched, just as he had left it. That's when he took a sharp weapon and cut off Mary's hands and feet. He carried them back to his house, and in the same cabinet where he had already kept her clothes, he wrapped the remains with those very garments. For him, they became twisted trophies, tokens of the crime he had committed. But even after doing all of this, Miyazaki still wasn't satisfied. He began burning Mary's bones, and after reducing them to ashes, he ground them into a fine powder. He packed the remains inside a small box, along with some of her teeth, a Polaroid photograph of her clothes, and a chilling note that read, "Mari, cremated bones. Investigate, prove."
私がそれを見る限りでは、全部を信用することはできないんです。ただ、文章はやはりマリを連れて行った人が書いたものだと思います。これが人間としてこんなことがどうしてできる?
Months later, Mari's body was finally discovered. But when investigators examined it, they realized her hands and feet were missing. When her parents learned of this, their grief deepened. They began searching desperately for Mari's missing hands and feet, hoping somehow to reunite her remains. But after exhausting every effort and finding nothing, they turned to national television. On live TV, Mari's devastated parents made a direct plea to the unknown killer. "Whoever you are, we don't want to harm you. Please, just return our daughter's hands and feet. Without them, she cannot rest in peace in heaven," which is genuinely so heartbreaking. To kill an innocent little girl, to desecrate her, to discard her body, and then to torment her grieving family afterward. Miyazaki was enjoying himself. The thrill he got from committing these acts only pushed him further. And soon, he went out in search of his next victim. On October 3, 1988, 7-year-old Masami Yoshizawa was walking home. At that very moment, Miyazaki happened to be passing through the area. That's when his eyes fell on Masami. He offered to drop Masami off at her home, tempting her with chocolates along the way. Completely unaware of Miyazaki's true intentions, the little girl accepted and got into his car. But instead of driving toward her house, Miyazaki steered the vehicle toward the same bridge, the very place where he had murdered Mari Kano. After parking the car beneath the bridge, he did to Masami what he had done to Mari before her. But this time he didn't send a box to the girl's family. Instead, when he returned home, Miyazaki picked up the phone and made a call directly to Masami's parents. And when Masami's parents picked up the call, Miyazaki said nothing. He just stayed silent, breathing heavily into the receiver over and over, simply to torment them. A few weeks later, on December 12, 1988, Miyazaki was driving near his home when he spotted another child, 4-year-old Erika Namba. Miyazaki lured Erika into his car, persuading her with kind words. He then drove her to a quiet parking lot. His pattern was always the same. He would take his victims away from safety, and what followed was unspeakable. This time, he brought Erika to the back seat of his car. There, he began forcing her to peel off herself. Miyazaki took several photographs of Erika before ending her life. Afterwards, he desecrated her body and then wrapped her remains carefully in a bedsheet. He dumped Erika's body right there in the parking lot. And this time, just as he had done after his first murder, he sent a note to Erika's family. Erika, cold, cough, throat, rest, death.
憎いもう憎さもあるけども、一つも手を挙げて宮崎叩けなかったと、これがちょっとね本当に許してもらえるもんなら、正美が苦しかったその思いをね同じように味わしてやりたいですよ。
After Erika's death, everything changed. Parents, neighbors, even the police, everyone was on high alert. No one dared let their children go out alone. Whether it was a boy or a girl, parents even stopped allowing their kids to visit the houses of neighbors or friends. The entire community was living in fear. During this time, police patrols increased across the neighborhoods, which brought a brief sense of security. For about 6 months after Erika's death, there were no new incidents, no updates, nothing. People began to believe that the nightmare was finally over, that their children were safe again. Slowly, their guard began to drop, and that was when Miyazaki struck again. On June 6, 1989, Miyazaki lured 5-year-old Ayako Nomoto into his car with chocolates. Once again, he took obscene photographs of her before ending her life. But this time, he broke away from his usual pattern. Unlike the earlier cases, Miyazaki did not dispose of Ayako's body. Instead, he brought her remains back to his own home. For 2 days, Tsutomu Miyazaki kept Ayako's body in his home and sexually assaulted her body. He photographed her remains in different positions and used them to gratify different things to gratify his own twisted desires. But even that wasn't enough. Miyazaki went further. He mutilated Ayako's body, cutting it into pieces. Miyazaki did not discard all of Ayako's remains. Some parts he kept with him. In his escalating madness, he even attempted to cook portions of what he had preserved. And in one of his most disturbing acts, he drank blood from Ayako's hand. Just imagine, a human being sinking to such depths of depravity, doing things that ordinary people could never even think of. Acts so inhuman, they go beyond imagination. Yet Miyazaki carried them out against innocent little girls. The people around him never suspected a thing. Not his neighbors, not his friends. Perhaps not even his own parents ever imagined that their son was capable of becoming such a monster. And by then, he was completely gone, lost to his own darkness. He had become a kind of demon, one that probably would never have stopped. If he hadn't been caught that day in the parking lot, who knows how many more children would have suffered. On July 23, 1989, 2 sisters were playing outside in their garden when a Nissan car pulled up nearby. Inside was Tsutomu Miyazaki. He approached them and managed to lure the younger sister toward him, eventually leading her away to a nearby park. The older sister quickly noticed something was wrong. Alarmed, she ran back to her house, most likely to call for her parents. He convinced her to take off her clothes, and Miyazaki was also taking off his clothes during this time. He was also taking pictures of her private parts with his camera. Miyazaki was so absorbed in what he was doing, undressing and attempting to take those photographs, that he didn't notice the little girl's father had arrived. The moment her father saw what was happening, he rushed forward and punched Miyazaki with full force. In a panic, Miyazaki scrambled away, running naked from the scene. The father immediately called the police. When officers arrived and began collecting information, they noticed something strange. Near the parked Nissan, a man appeared, moving in an odd, almost disoriented way. What unsettled them most was that the man was completely naked, carrying nothing but a camera in his hands. The police kept their eyes fixed on him as he tried to approach the car. His behavior was bizarre, erratic, and deeply suspicious. It didn't take long for them to realize this wasn't just anyone. This was the man they had been hunting for months. Tsutomu Miyazaki, the killer who had terrorized families across Japan. When the police finally arrested Miyazaki, they still didn't know the full extent of what he had done. It was only after they searched his house that the horrifying truth came to light. Inside, they discovered a massive collection of videotapes, hundreds upon hundreds of recordings. But that wasn't all. Hidden inside his cupboards, police found body parts belonging to his victims. Among them were the severed hands and feet of little Mari. When Miyazaki was questioned about why he had done all of this, his response was as chilling as his crimes. He calmly told investigators that, quote, in his mind, he was doing a good thing. He went on to say that it wasn't really him committing these acts at all. According to Miyazaki, a figure he called the Mystic Man, or sometimes the Rat Man, was the one forcing him to do everything. When psychiatrists later evaluated him, their reports revealed something deeply unsettling. Miyazaki, they concluded, suffered from dissociative identity disorder and schizophrenia. But it was also proven that Miyazaki was fully aware of the gravity of his actions, and for such horrific crimes, there was only one punishment left: the death penalty. On June 17, 2008, Tsutomu Miyazaki was executed by hanging.
聞いてください。そこはあってもないのをやってません。嘘言ってます。本当のこと言います。なんで黙ってたのと不安なんです。はい、タイマー騒ぎになって顔はシャツで持って知られざる真実が。
宮崎勉の3名の死刑を執行しました。正義の実現のために法の支配する国をしっかり守っていくために粛々と死刑を執行しております。
When Miyazaki died, he was 45 years old. Until his very last breath, he showed no remorse for his actions. He never apologized on television, never expressed regret to the police, and never sought forgiveness from the families of the children he had murdered. In fact, he continued to live his life as if nothing he had done had ever mattered. Even in prison, Miyazaki spent his days absorbed in his own world, reading comics, manga, or watching anime. Watching him, it seemed as if he never truly realized the pain he had caused the families of so many innocent children. From prison, he even wrote letters to his parents. In one letter to his father, he went so far as to place the blame for his actions on them. And in the letters he wrote to his mother, he once instructed her to regularly change the oil in his car, or else it would break down. What kind of man was he? And you know what makes it even more infuriating? In his final words before execution, Miyazaki said, "Please, tell the world that I was a gentleman." Tsutomu Miyazaki may never have felt remorse for the atrocities he committed, but the consequences of his actions were painfully real, and they fell squarely on the shoulders of the victims' parents, who were left to live with the unimaginable loss of their children. His father never contributed financially to his trial. They believed that doing so would be an injustice to the families of the children he had harmed. He sold all his land and property to compensate the families of the victims. Not only that, Miyazaki's family publicly disowned him, but the mounting shame and the unbearable weight of their son's horrific actions became too much for his father to bear. And in 1994, he took his own life. Miyazaki's family had to shut down their newspaper business. His sisters had to quit their jobs, and the whole family was forced to live a life of seclusion. When Miyazaki's mother was asked to appear to answer questions about his crimes, she refused outright. She says, "This isn't even our son." Miyazaki watched so much anime and was so obsessed with it that it somehow shaped him into a twisted killer. And that's why he was called Otaku Killer, because of his actions. For many years, people who enjoyed anime were viewed with suspicion and contempt. Society began to associate anyone who watched anime with being like Miyazaki. But this doesn't reflect on the rest of us. Tsutomu Miyazaki was a serial killer, not just someone who liked anime. He didn't commit these acts for any cultural reason. He committed all his crimes purely to fulfill his own desires. He was a sick and twisted criminal, caring only about satisfying his own urges, with no regard for anyone else. And with that, the chilling case of the Otaku Killer comes to a close. Here it ends. But with that, stay safe, stay kind, and keep your eyes open and your secrets closer. I'll be back soon. Goodbye.